Welcome to EduCasts, home of EduCasters. In the world of education, we often find ourselves obsessing over the what. We worry about what content to cover, what standards to meet, and what facts our students need to memorize for the next standardized test. But any veteran teacher knows that the real magic doesn't happen when a student simply memorizes a fact. It happens when they figure out how to learn that fact, and more importantly, when they realize they haven't learned it yet. This is the realm of metacognition. It is often buzzed about in professional development seminars as thinking about thinking, but that catchy slogan barely scratches the surface of the groundbreaking work laid out by John H. Flavell in the 1970s. To truly get a handle on how students learn and why some bright students fail while others soar, we have to dig deep into Flavell's theory. It is not just an academic concept reserved for ivory tower psychology departments. It is the engine under the hood of student success. When we peel back the layers of Flavell's work, we find a blueprint for turning passive students into active, self-regulated learners who are in the driver's seat of their own education. The birth of the concept. Before we dive into the nitty-gritty, we have to look at where this came from. Before the 1970s, developmental psychology was heavily dominated by Jean Piaget. Piaget was brilliant, no doubt, but his focus was largely on how children perceive the world and logical operations. Then came John Flavell, an American developmental psychologist who started noticing something interesting about memory. Flavell realized that young children weren't just bad at memory tasks. They were bad at knowing how to memorize. They lacked the ability to look at their own cognitive processes and regulate them. In 1976, Flavell coined the term metacognition to describe this higher-order thinking. He defined it as knowledge simply concerning one's own cognitive processes and products or anything related to them. In plain English, if cognition is the act of doing a task, metacognition is the act of checking on how well you are doing that task. It's the difference between reading a paragraph, cognition, and realizing you have no idea what you just read and need to go back, metacognition. Flavell's framework suggests that learning isn't just a linear path of absorbing information. It's a complex feedback loop where the learner is constantly monitoring their own progress. Flavell didn't just throw a definition out there and call it a day. He broke metacognition down into two main buckets that interact with each other: metacognitive knowledge and metacognitive regulation, often called metacognitive experiences. Understanding the distinction between these two is a game changer for educators. 1. Metacognitive knowledge. The blueprint. Metacognitive knowledge is what a learner knows about how learning works. It's the static information stored in long-term memory. Flavell split this into three distinct categories: person variables, task variables, and strategy variables. Person variables. Knowing yourself. This is all about what a student knows about themselves and others as processors of information. Flavell categorized this further into intra-individual, inter-individual, and universal knowledge. Intra-individual variables refer to what a student knows about their own internal strengths and weaknesses. It's a student saying, "I'm an auditory learner, so I need to listen to the lecture again," or "I know I get anxious during timed tests, so I need to breathe." When a student has a handle on this, they stop banging their head against the wall using methods that don't work for them. Inter-individual variables involve knowing how humans differ from one another. It's realizing that just because your friend can study with death metal playing in the background doesn't mean you can. It's understanding that the teacher might explain things differently than the textbook. Universal variables are the general truths about human cognition. For example, knowing that short-term memory is limited is a universal variable. If a student knows they can't hold 15 vocabulary definitions in their head at once, they won't try to. They'll use a strategy like chunking instead. Task variables, sizing up the challenge. This aspect deals with the nature of the information being processed. A savvy student knows that reading a comic book is fundamentally different from reading a biology textbook. They understand that writing a 5-paragraph essay requires a different mental load than writing a text message. Flavell pointed out that successful learners assess the task before they even start. They look at the length, the density, and the structure. If a student ignores task variables, they treat every assignment the same way. That's how you end up with students trying to cram for a comprehensive final the night before. They underestimated the task variable, and they pay the price for it. Strategy variables. The toolbox. This is knowing what tools are available to accomplish a goal. It's not enough to know that you need to study. You need to know how to study. This includes knowing that making flashcards is good for vocabulary, but terrible for understanding complex, historical themes. Flavell made a crucial distinction here between cognitive strategies and metacognitive strategies. A cognitive strategy is highlighting the text. A metacognitive strategy is asking, is highlighting this text actually helping me remember it, or am I just coloring? A student with high strategy knowledge has a deep toolbox and knows exactly which tool to pull out for the job at hand. 2. Metacognitive regulation. The action. If metacognitive knowledge is the map, metacognitive regulation is the actual driving. These are the active processes, the doing part of metacognition. Flavell, along with researchers like Anne Brown, who expanded on his work, identified 3 key phases: planning, monitoring, and evaluating. Planning, before the task. This is where the rubber meets the road. Before a student writes a single word of an essay, are they thinking about the goal? Planning involves setting objectives, selecting strategies, and allocating resources. In a classroom, you can spot the students who skip this step a mile away. They are the ones who dive right into a math problem without reading the full prompt. They start writing the introduction to a story without knowing the ending. Flavell argued that the time spent in this pre-game phase is often more valuable than the time spent on the task itself. It paves the way for a smooth ride. Monitoring during the task. This is the check-in. It is the ability to pause and ask, does this make sense? Monitoring is perhaps the most critical skill for reading comprehension. We've all had that experience where we read a page of a book, get to the bottom, and realize our eyes moved over the words, but our brain was thinking about dinner. A student with strong monitoring skills catches themselves drifting. They stop. They reread. They look up a word they don't know. This is often called the feeling of knowing. Flavell emphasized that these metacognitive experiences, those gut feelings that something is right or wrong, are what trigger the regulation. If you don't feel confused, you won't fix the problem. Evaluating after the task. Once the dust settles, what happens? Do students just shove the graded paper into the bottom of their backpack, never to be seen again? Or do they look at it and analyze what happened? Evaluation involves appraising the products and the efficiency of the learning. I got a C on this test. Why? Did I study the wrong material? Did I run out of time? This post-game analysis informs the person variables we talked about earlier. It updates the database. If a student evaluates that cramming didn't work, they hopefully update their knowledge base to include, I am not a person who can cram successfully. The interplay, knowledge and experience. One of the most interesting parts of Flavell's theory is how these pieces talk to each other. He proposed that metacognitive knowledge and metacognitive experiences are constantly looping. Imagine a student, let's call him Leo, is faced with a difficult physics problem. 1. Knowledge. Leo knows he struggles with thermodynamics. Person variable. He knows this problem is wordy and tricky. Task variable. He knows that drawing a diagram usually helps him. Strategy variable. 2. Planning. Based on this knowledge, he decides to draw a diagram first. 3. Experience monitoring. As he is drawing, he gets a sudden feeling of confusion, a metacognitive experience. He realizes the diagram doesn't match the numbers in the problem. 4. Regulation. He stops, erases, and rereads the prompt. 5. Update. After solving it, he realizes, wow, drawing the diagram really saved me there. This updates his metacognitive knowledge, reinforcing the strategy for next time. When this cycle breaks down, learning halts. If Leo ignored the feeling of confusion, he would have failed. If he didn't know drawing a diagram was an option, he would have been stuck. Flavell showed us that these aren't isolated skills. They are a dynamic system.